clock is running, and every person in that room already knows it. Right now, somewhere in Islamabad, the last diplomatic conversation that could prevent a full-scale regional war is either happening or falling apart. There is no middle ground left, no third option in reserve. The window that remains open, and it is closing fast, is the window Trump's negotiating team flew halfway around the world to climb through before it shuts permanently. This is the moment, not a moment. The moment, and what makes it so extraordinary is that every single variable in this crisis is moving simultaneously. The diplomacy, the military pressure, the economic warfare, the energy markets, the domestic politics of 3 different countries on 3 different continents. All of it in motion at once, all of it interconnected, all of it capable of triggering consequences that cascade far beyond whatever room these negotiators are sitting in right now. To understand what is at stake in Islamabad this week, you need to understand what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, what happened quietly on a Friday night with Russian oil tankers, and what the military situation actually looks like after weeks of an operation that has already altered the balance of power in the Persian Gulf. Every piece connects, every piece matters, and by the end, you will understand exactly why the next 72 hours may determine the shape of the next decade. Start with Islamabad. This is where the story either ends or accelerates into territory no serious analyst wants to contemplate. Trump did not send a junior diplomat or a career foreign service officer. He sent what people inside the administration are calling the A-Team. Vice President Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, architect of the Abraham Accords, the man who spent years building Gulf relationships everyone said were impossible. That last name is the one that should make you stop and think. Kushner's presence is not incidental. It is a deliberate signal about what the administration believes this negotiation can become. The Abraham Accords were not just a peace deal between Israel and Arab states. They were a regional restructuring, a new architecture for how Middle Eastern countries relate to each other and to Washington. Kushner in Islamabad communicates that Trump is not simply trying to pause a military confrontation. He is trying to build a broader regional framework that addresses the underlying tensions that made this crisis inevitable. Whether that ambition is achievable in the current environment is a genuinely open question, because Iran's signals have been, to put it diplomatically, contradictory. The American side announced that talks would begin Tuesday, framing it as a breakthrough. And then, within hours, Iran's Tasnim News Agency published a statement that walked to the edge of refusal without quite crossing it. The message, stripped of diplomatic language, was this: as long as the naval blockade remains in place, Iran will not sit at the table. That is not a rejection. A rejection would actually be simpler. What Iran delivered was a conditional, a door left open by exactly 1 inch, with a condition the United States cannot meet without appearing to capitulate. A negotiating posture that keeps options alive while projecting enough resistance to satisfy the domestic audience watching this process with deep suspicion. Trump, characteristically, responded by raising the temperature rather than lowering it. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Those were the words. And they came with specifics that moved the threat into genuinely new territory. Previous warnings focused on military targets, installations, naval assets, command infrastructure. What Trump put on the table this week was different. He stated directly that if no agreement emerges, strikes would extend to Iran's civilian power grid, its electrical generation capacity, its bridges, its infrastructure. That is not a threat against a military. That is a threat against a civilian population. It represents an escalation that has not gone unnoticed by international observers, human rights organizations, or American allies in Europe, who are already deeply uncomfortable with the trajectory of this confrontation. The question is whether it works. Whether a threat of that magnitude is enough to move Iranian negotiators toward a compromise they have refused to make. History on this question is genuinely mixed. Maximum pressure sometimes produces breakthroughs, and sometimes it produces entrenchment, where the threatened party concludes that backing down under explicit coercion is more dangerous to their political survival than accepting the consequences of refusal. Now move to the water, because what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz is not an abstraction or a hypothetical risk analysts are modeling in think tanks. It is a live crisis already affecting energy markets worldwide, and one that escalated again yesterday in a way that should be in every headline. On April 18th, 2 Indian-flagged tankers attempted to transit the Strait of Hormuz through international waters. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps fired warning shots. Both tankers turned back. Iran then issued a statement that formalized what had previously been implicit. Any vessel approaching the area would be treated as a collaborator with hostile forces and designated as a legitimate military target. Let that settle for a moment. What Iran has effectively done is declare the world's most critical oil corridor a war zone where commercial shipping rules no longer apply. 20% of the world's daily oil supply moves through that strait. Not 20% of Iranian oil, 20% of global supply. Japan, South Korea, India. Every nation that depends on Gulf oil to keep its industries running now faces a situation where the physical pathway for that energy has been rendered impassable by a military standoff between two nuclear-adjacent powers. The mutual blockade is now fully locked in. The United States Navy is enforcing a cordon around Iranian ports. No vessel enters or exits without American authorization. Iran is enforcing its own cordon at the choke point that controls access to the entire Gulf. Each side is using economic strangulation as pressure. Each side is absorbing costs that were not part of any original calculation. Trump claims the blockade is costing Iran $500 million per day. The figure is disputed by independent economists, but the directional truth is not in doubt. Iran's oil export capacity has been devastated, foreign currency earnings have collapsed, and the economic pressure on ordinary Iranians is severe and intensifying. But the mirror image of that pressure is equally real. Global energy prices have spiked. Gasoline prices inside the United States are rising. The inflation the administration spent 2 years trying to bring under control is getting a new and unwanted push from an oil market that cannot price in a crisis nobody can predict. This brings us to the decision that nobody in Washington wanted to talk about publicly, but that tells you more about the true state of this crisis than almost anything else. Friday night, April 17th, no press conference, no formal announcement, a regulatory filing most people would never read. The Treasury Department extended sanctions waivers for Russian oil tankers at sea. 30 additional days of protection from the financial penalties that are supposed to be the cornerstone of the pressure campaign against Moscow. 2 days earlier, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had stated publicly that no such waivers would be granted. No exceptions, no extensions. The sanctions on Russian oil were firm. And then, 48 hours later, the waivers appeared. The explanation was framed in the clinical language of energy market stability. With Middle Eastern supply effectively offline, removing Russian oil from global markets simultaneously would have triggered price shocks that administration economists assessed as unacceptable. The math is straightforward, even if the political implications are uncomfortable. You cannot simultaneously blockade Iranian oil and sanction Russian oil without engineering a global energy crisis that hits American consumers at the pump in ways that no administration survives. The political fallout has been immediate and bipartisan. Republicans who built the case for maximum pressure on both Iran and Russia are watching the administration hand Moscow a financial lifeline because the Iran strategy created a supply vacuum only Russian oil can fill. Democrats who oppose the Iran escalation are pointing to this as evidence that the costs of military confrontation extend in directions that were entirely predictable and entirely ignored. The criticism from both sides converges on the same uncomfortable sentence. We are punishing Iran while filling Russia's treasury. There is no clean answer, because it is accurate. Now for the military picture. Understanding where negotiations stand requires understanding what Operation Epic Fury has already done to Iran's capacity to resist. According to assessments from defense analysts, including analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Operation Epic Fury has produced results that are, by any conventional military measure, staggering. Approximately 90% of Iran's naval combat capacity has been destroyed or rendered non-operational. Surface vessels, submarines, fast attack craft, the coastal missile batteries designed to make any Hormuz confrontation catastrophic. All of it degraded to a fraction of its pre-conflict strength. More than 250 senior officers within Iran's military leadership have been killed. The institutional knowledge, the command coherence that Iran spent decades building into its armed forces has been decapitated at a scale that has no modern precedent in any conflict not involving occupation forces. By every traditional military metric, Iran has already lost this confrontation. And yet Iran is still there, still shutting the strait, still firing warning shots at tankers, still projecting defiance that its military situation does not rationally support. This is the paradox that makes Islamabad so critical and so unpredictable. A nation whose conventional military capacity has been largely destroyed does not stop existing as a threat. It changes the nature of the threat it poses. Asymmetric warfare, proxy forces, the willingness to absorb costs a rational actor would refuse, the use of geography itself as a weapon that requires no naval fleet to deploy. A country with nothing left to lose conventionally is in some ways more dangerous than one that still has assets to protect. The negotiators in Islamabad understand this. That is why they are there. Kushner's regional ambitions, Vance's political weight, Witkoff's deal-making credentials. They are trying to give Iran a way out that is not simply capitulation, a framework where the face-saving elements are real enough that Tehran can present whatever emerges as something other than surrender. Whether that gap is bridgeable at all is what the next 72 hours will answer. The world is not watching casually. Every oil-importing nation has traders monitoring every signal from Islamabad. Every American voter filling their tank is feeling the consequence of a closed strait. Every analyst watching the quiet extension of Russian oil waivers is updating their assessment of how far the costs of this confrontation have already spread. The clock in Islamabad is running, the strait remains shut. The math is getting harder for everyone. The next move belongs to negotiators in a room the world cannot see, making decisions the world cannot escape. Whatever happens next begins now, and the entire world is watching.